The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as the royal staff prepared for what many considered the most controversial wedding in modern British history. Charles, now king, was finally marrying Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman who had stood by his side through decades of public scandal and private heartache. In a small sitting room overlooking the castle grounds, Camilla nervously adjusted her cream-colored coat for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her pearl necklace, a family heirloom that had belonged to her grandmother. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, yet something felt terribly wrong. Her sister Annabelle rushed into the room, her face flushed with excitement and concern. "Camilla, darling, the cars are here, but there's been some confusion about the seating arrangements for the ceremony." Camilla turned from the mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had waited 35 years for this moment. "What kind of confusion?" Annabelle hesitated, glancing toward the door before speaking in hushed tones. "The palace staff informed us that there's been a change. They say the ceremony space is smaller than expected, and some adjustments had to be made to the guest list." The words hit Camilla like a cold wave. She had specifically discussed the guest arrangements with Charles weeks ago. Her family, though not as grand as the royals, meant everything to her. Her children, Tom and Laura, were already part of the wedding party, but her extended family, her cousins, her childhood friends who had supported her through the darkest years of public criticism, were supposed to be there too. "Which adjustments?" Camilla asked, though she already feared the answer. Annabelle's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Your cousin Margaret and her family, the Elliots from Cornwall, and Uncle Robert. They've all been told their invitations have been reconsidered." Camilla sank into the antique chair by the window. Outside, she could see the arriving guests, dignitaries from around the world, members of parliament, foreign royalty. The guest list read like a who's who of international power, yet her own family was being quietly erased from her wedding day. "Did Charles know about this?" she asked, already knowing the answer would complicate everything. Annabelle shook her head. "The instruction came from the private secretary's office. They said it was a security concern and a matter of protocol. Something about maintaining the appropriate level of formality for a royal wedding." The door opened, and Tom, Camilla's son, entered wearing his morning suit. His usually cheerful demeanor was replaced by visible tension. "Mother, I've been trying to reach you. There's something you need to know about the reception arrangements as well." Camilla looked up at her son, seeing the same concerned expression she had noticed in Annabelle. "What now?" "The seating chart for the reception has been revised. Our family table has been moved to the far side of the room, away from the main royal table. And some of our relatives have been told the reception is by invitation only, separate from the ceremony invitation they already received." The weight of realization settled on Camilla's shoulders. This wasn't about space or security. This was about the royal establishment making it clear that while they would accept her as Charles's wife, they would not embrace her family as equals. The message was subtle but unmistakable. She could enter their world, but she would enter it alone. Laura, Camilla's daughter, appeared in the doorway, overhearing the conversation. "Mummy, what are we going to do? Aunt Sarah is downstairs crying. She traveled all the way from Scotland for this." Camilla stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the courtyard where Charles was greeting early arriving guests. She watched her future husband, the man who had promised her that their marriage would mean acceptance, not just tolerance. She had believed him when he said their love had survived everything, and that nothing could diminish what they meant to each other. "We're going to proceed with the wedding," Camilla said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "But I need to speak with Charles immediately." As she made her way through the castle corridors toward Charles's preparation room, Camilla passed portraits of previous royal consorts, women who had married into the family and somehow found their place. She wondered how many of them had faced similar moments of quiet humiliation, and how many had simply accepted it as the price of wearing a royal title. The wedding would proceed as planned. The world would see the fairy tale ending to a love story that had captivated and scandalized the public for decades. But in the quiet corners of Windsor Castle, Camilla's family was learning their first lesson about royal life. Love might conquer all, but it doesn't always conquer the ancient protocols and unspoken hierarchies that govern the British monarchy. The bells of Windsor Castle began to ring, announcing that the ceremony would begin soon. As Camilla prepared to walk toward her future, she realized she was leaving something behind. The question was whether Charles would choose to walk with her into a new kind of royal family, or whether he would allow the palace machinery to quietly erase the people who had shaped the woman he claimed to love. The silence that followed this moment would indeed change everything at the palace. But nobody that morning could have predicted just how deep and lasting those changes would be. Charles stood before a full-length mirror in the state apartments, adjusting his ceremonial military uniform for the final time. The weight of the medals and decorations seemed heavier than usual, as if they carried not just the history of his service, but the burden of choices he was about to make. His private secretary, Michael Hartwell, briefed him on the final arrangements while valets made last-minute adjustments to his appearance. "Sir, the Archbishop is ready, and all guests have been seated according to the revised arrangements," Hartwell said, consulting his clipboard with the efficiency of a man who had orchestrated dozens of royal events. "Revised arrangements?" Charles paused, catching something in the secretary's tone that made him look up from fastening his sword belt. Before Hartwell could respond, the door burst open with a force that made both men turn sharply. Camilla entered, her wedding attire immaculate, but her expression stormy. Behind her, a clearly flustered footman attempted to announce her properly, but she waved him away. "Charles, we need to talk. Now." Her voice carried an authority that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Hartwell immediately moved toward the door. "Perhaps I should give you both some privacy before the ceremony begins." "No," Camilla said firmly, her eyes never leaving Charles's face. "I think Mr. Hartwell should stay. He seems to know quite a bit about our wedding arrangements that I wasn't informed about." Charles felt his stomach tighten. The careful choreography of the morning was clearly unraveling, and he could see in Camilla's expression that something significant had gone wrong. "Darling, what's happened?" "What's happened?" Camilla said, moving closer to him, "is that half of my family has just been uninvited to our wedding. What's happened is that my relatives have been shuffled to the back of the reception like unwanted guests at someone else's party. What's happened is that I'm apparently marrying into a family that believes love comes with conditions." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Charles looked from Camilla to Hartwell, whose face had gone pale. "Michael, what is she talking about?" Hartwell cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, there were some necessary adjustments made to accommodate security requirements and protocol standards. The Lord Chamberlain's office felt that certain modifications would ensure the ceremony maintained its appropriate dignity." "Whose decision was this?" Charles's voice dropped to the dangerously quiet tone that those close to him recognized as barely controlled anger. "The decision came through proper channels, sir. The Queen's private secretary coordinated with the security services and the protocol office. It was felt that Mrs. Parker Bowles's extended family, while lovely people I'm sure, might not be entirely prepared for the formality and media scrutiny of a royal wedding." Camilla stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "Not prepared? My family has dealt with media scrutiny for 35 years because of our relationship, Charles. They've had photographers camping outside their homes, reporters going through their rubbish bins, their children followed to school. If anyone is prepared for royal life, it's the people who have already survived loving me." Charles began to understand the magnitude of what had happened behind his back. The palace machinery, the same system that had tried to control his first marriage and had made his relationship with Camilla a scandal, was now attempting to sanitize their wedding day by erasing the people who mattered most to his bride. "Who specifically has been excluded?" he asked quietly. Camilla's voice trembled as she listed the names. "Cousin Margaret, who helped me through the divorce. Uncle Robert, who walked me down the aisle when my father died. The Elliots, who have been like second parents to Tom and Laura. People who have stood by us when the whole world was calling our love an affair and a scandal." Hartwell shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if I may explain the reasoning." "No," Charles said sharply, cutting him off. "You may not explain. You may fix this." But Camilla shook her head. "It's too late to fix this, Charles. Do you know what this really is? This is your family's way of telling me that I can have the title and the position, but I can't bring my world into theirs. I can be your wife, but only if I pretend that the people who made me who I am don't matter." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of the military band outside, rehearsing fanfares for the ceremony. Charles realized that this moment was about far more than seating arrangements and guest lists. This was about whether their marriage would be a true union or simply another royal performance where authentic emotion was carefully managed and controlled. "The ceremony is scheduled to begin in 20 minutes, sir," Hartwell said quietly. Charles looked at his reflection in the mirror, seeing not just a bridegroom, but a future king who was being forced to choose between the institution he would someday lead and the woman he loved. The uniform he wore represented duty, tradition, and the the weight of centuries of royal protocol. But the woman standing before him represented something equally important, the possibility of a more human monarchy. "Cancel the revised arrangements," he said finally. "Sir." Hartwell looked confused. "You heard me. Cancel them. Restore the original guest list. If the ceremony space is too small, we'll make it bigger. If protocol is offended, then protocol will have to adapt." Camilla stared at him, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. "Charles, your mother's secretary said." "I don't care what my mother's secretary said. I care what I say. And what I say is that you don't marry half of someone. You don't love part of a person and ignore the relationships that shape them." He turned to Hartwell. "Make it happen." But even as he spoke the words, Charles could feel the weight of the forces aligned against them. The palace wasn't just a building. It was a system with its own momentum, its own priorities, and its own ways of maintaining control. He was ordering changes, but he wasn't sure his orders would be followed. The door opened again, and this time it was one of the Queen's equerries, looking official and urgent. "Your Royal Highness, Her Majesty requests your immediate presence in the Oak Room. There are some final matters regarding the ceremony that require your attention." Charles and Camilla exchanged glances. They both understood that the real battle was about to begin, and it would be fought not with the media or the public, but within the family itself. The wedding was still going to happen, but the question now was whether it would represent a new beginning or simply another compromise with a system that had already decided what their marriage should look like. As they prepared to face the Queen, both Charles and Camilla realized that their love story was about to become something much more complicated, a test of whether the British monarchy could evolve or whether it would continue to demand that those who entered it surrender the very things that made them human. The Oak Room at Windsor Castle had witnessed centuries of royal decisions, from matters of state to family crises that shaped the monarchy. As Charles and Camilla entered, they found Queen Elizabeth II seated at the polished mahogany table, her wedding outfit immaculate, her expression unreadable. The room felt smaller than usual, with the weight of unspoken tension filling every corner. Princess Anne sat to the Queen's right, her face set in the stern expression she wore when family duty conflicted with personal feelings. Prince Edward occupied a chair near the window, clearly uncomfortable with the brewing confrontation. The Queen's private secretary, Sir Robin, stood discreetly by the door, ready to execute whatever decision emerged from this meeting. "Charles, Camilla, please sit," the Queen said, her voice carrying the authority of 6 decades on the throne. There was no warmth in her tone, but there was no anger either. This was the voice of a monarch addressing a constitutional issue. Charles remained standing, a gesture that everyone in the room recognized as defiance. "Mother, I understand there have been some unauthorized changes to our wedding arrangements." "Unauthorized?" The Queen's eyebrows rose slightly. "Everything that happens in this palace is authorized, Charles. The question is whether it's authorized by you or by the institution that will outlive us all." Camilla had prepared herself for royal displeasure, but she hadn't expected the conversation to begin with such philosophical weight. She could feel the centuries of royal protocol pressing down on the room like a physical presence. "Your Majesty," Camilla began, her voice steadier than she felt, "my family has been excluded from." The Queen held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Mrs. Parker Bowles, you misunderstand the nature of this conversation. This isn't about your family's feelings or even about fairness. This is about the survival of an institution that has endured for over 1,000 years by understanding the difference between private wishes and public responsibility." And leaned forward slightly. "Charles, you've fought for this marriage for decades. You've won. But winning doesn't mean you can ignore the realities of what you've won." The Queen stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard where guests were still arriving. "Do you see those people out there? Foreign heads of state, Commonwealth leaders, religious figures from around the world. They're not here to celebrate your happiness. They're here to witness the monarchy's ability to evolve while maintaining its dignity." Charles felt his frustration rising. "And apparently maintaining dignity requires humiliating the woman I'm marrying by treating her family as second-class citizens." "No," the Queen said sharply, turning back to face them. "It requires understanding that when you marry into this family, you're not just gaining a husband or wife. You're accepting responsibility for something larger than yourselves." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Camilla realized that this wasn't really about her family at all. This was about control, about establishing the terms under which she would be allowed to exist as a royal. "Your Majesty," Camilla said quietly. I've spent 35 years learning what it means to love someone in this family. I've watched my children grow up under public scrutiny. I've had my every gesture analyzed, my past dissected, my worthiness debated in Parliament and in newspapers. I thought I understood the price of admission. The Queen studied her for a long moment. And what did you think that price was? I thought it was my privacy, my anonymity, my ability to live a normal life. I didn't realize it also meant sacrificing the people who helped me survive all of that. Edward spoke for the first time. The guest list can be adjusted, Mother. Surely we can find room for Mrs. Parker Bowles's immediate family. But the Queen shook her head. This isn't about room, Edward. This is about precedent. If we make exceptions for Mrs. Parker Bowles's extended family today, what happens when other members of the family marry? Do we abandon all protocol? Do we turn royal weddings into family reunions? Charles stepped closer to his mother. You turned my first wedding into a circus that destroyed my marriage and nearly destroyed me. Are you really going to make the same mistake twice? The words hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. The Queen's expression didn't change, but everyone in the room felt the shift in dynamics. Your first marriage failed, Charles, because you married someone you didn't love while remaining in love with someone else. Don't blame the institution for your personal choices. And interjected, Mother, perhaps there's a middle ground. We could accommodate some of Mrs. Parker Bowles's family in a private viewing area, separate from the main ceremony, but still present. But Camilla shook her head. No, I won't have my family treated like distant observers at my own wedding. Either they're welcome as family, or this whole conversation is pointless. The Queen returned to her seat, her movements deliberate and calculated. Mrs. Parker Bowles, let me be very clear about something. The monarchy survives by being predictable, dignified, and consistent. We don't make emotional decisions based on personal feelings. We make institutional decisions based on long-term stability. And what about loyalty? Camilla asked. What about honoring the people who stood by us when the institution you're protecting spent decades trying to destroy our relationship? Sir Robin cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps, Your Majesty, we should consider the public perception aspects. The media is already watching for any signs of family tension. The Queen's eyes flashed with something that might have been irritation. The media will write what they choose to write regardless of what we do. Our responsibility is to ensure that when they write about this wedding, they're writing about a ceremony that upholds the dignity of the crown. Charles realized that the conversation had reached an impasse. His mother wasn't going to yield on principle, and Camilla couldn't accept a compromise that treated her family as an embarrassment. In 20 minutes, they were supposed to be exchanging vows, but, instead, they were negotiating the fundamental terms of their marriage. Mother, Charles said finally, I'm asking you to trust my judgment. I'm asking you to believe that the woman I love understands what she's accepting and that her family deserves the respect of being fully welcomed into ours. The Queen looked at her son for a long moment, and, for just an instant, her expression softened. Charles, I've watched you fight for this woman for most of your adult life. I've seen what that fight has cost you and what it's cost the family. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to protect what we've all worked so hard to preserve. But then, her voice hardened again. The arrangements will stand as they are. Mrs. Parker Bowles's immediate family will be seated appropriately. Her extended family will be welcome to celebrate at a separate reception this evening. The ceremony will proceed according to protocol. As the Queen stood to leave, she paused at the door. And Charles, this conversation ends here. Whatever differences we have, stay in this room. The world needs to see a united family today. After she left, the three siblings and Camilla sat in stunned silence. The battle had been fought and lost, but somehow Charles felt that the war was just beginning. The silence that followed the Queen's ultimatum would indeed change the palace forever, because it established a new understanding. Charles and Camilla could have their marriage, but only on the monarchy's terms. The bells of Windsor Castle rang out across the grounds as Charles and Camilla emerged from the chapel as husband and wife, their faces showing the careful smiles that royal training had perfected over decades. To the world watching, it was the fairy tale ending to one of the most famous love stories in modern history. But behind those practiced expressions lay the weight of compromises that had already begun to reshape their marriage before it had truly begun. In the receiving line, Camilla greeted world leaders and dignitaries with the grace she had spent years developing. Each handshake and curtsy was executed perfectly, but her eyes kept searching the crowd for the faces that weren't there. Her cousin Margaret, who had been like a sister to her during the difficult years, was somewhere in London, having been quietly asked to leave the castle grounds after the ceremony. Uncle Robert, who had given her away at her first wedding when her father couldn't be there, was driving back to Cornwall with tears in his eyes. Prince William stood near his father, carrying out his duties as best man with the professionalism expected of a future king. But even he seemed uncomfortable with the visible absence of so many people who mattered to Camilla. He had grown fond of her over the years, seeing how she made his father happy, and he understood better than most the personal cost of royal protocol. "Your Royal Highness," a foreign ambassador said to Camilla, "it's wonderful to finally meet the woman who has brought such happiness to His Royal Highness." Camilla smiled and nodded, but inside she wondered if happiness was the right word for what she felt. Relief, perhaps. Vindication, certainly. But the happiness felt tainted by the knowledge that her marriage was beginning with a lie. The lie that this was a celebration of union when it was really a demonstration of institutional control. Across the courtyard, Tom and Laura Parker Bowles moved through the crowd with careful dignity, speaking to guests and accepting congratulations. But both of them carried the burden of knowing that this should have been a day when two families came together, not a day when one family was selectively edited to fit royal standards. "Mummy looks beautiful," Laura said to Tom as they watched their mother pose for official photographs. "She does," Tom agreed, but his voice carried a sadness that matched what they were both feeling. "I just wish Aunt Sarah could have seen this." The reception that followed was a masterpiece of royal pageantry. The state apartments had been transformed into a wedding venue worthy of the history books, with flowers flown in from around the Commonwealth and table settings that had been used for royal celebrations for generations. Every detail spoke of tradition, continuity, and the timeless nature of the monarchy. But at table 7, tucked discreetly in a corner where the cameras couldn't easily reach, sat the remainder of Camilla's family. They ate excellent food, drank fine wine, and made polite conversation with the minor dignitaries they had been seated with. But the message was clear. They were there on sufferance, not as equals. Charles gave his wedding speech with the eloquence expected of a future king, speaking of love triumphing over adversity, of the importance of family, and of the future they would build together. The words were beautiful and sincere, but they rang hollow for anyone who knew what had happened that morning. "I want to thank everyone who has supported Camilla and me through the difficult years," Charles said, looking directly at his bride. "Your loyalty and love have meant everything to us." Camilla met his eyes and managed to smile, but she knew that some of the people he was thanking weren't even there to hear his gratitude. The speech continued with thanks to the Queen, to the royal family, to the Commonwealth, but there was no mention of the Parker Bowles family members who had been quietly excluded from the celebration. Later, as the evening wound down and the official guests began to depart, Charles and Camilla found themselves alone for the first time since becoming husband and wife. They stood on the balcony of their private apartment, looking out over the castle grounds where the evidence of the day's celebration was already being cleared away. "How do you feel?" Charles asked, taking her hand. Camilla was quiet for a long moment. "Married," she said finally, but also somehow alone. Charles understood exactly what she meant. They had achieved their dream of marrying each other, but in the process, they had learned that their marriage would exist within boundaries they hadn't fully understood before. The palace had allowed their love, but only on institutional terms. "I'm sorry about your family," Charles said quietly. "Are you?" Camilla asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious. "Or are you sorry that I'm upset about it?" The question hung between them, and Charles realized he didn't have an easy answer. He was sorry that she was hurt, but was he willing to fundamentally challenge the system that had hurt her? Was he prepared to use his position as heir to the throne to demand that the monarchy adapt to their marriage rather than the other way around? "The evening reception tomorrow will include everyone," Charles said. "Your whole family will be there." "Yes," Camilla agreed. "At a separate event, in a different location, away from the official celebration. They'll be welcome to celebrate our marriage as long as they do it quietly and separately." They stood in comfortable silence, both understanding that their wedding day had been a victory that felt like a defeat. They were married. They were officially accepted by the royal family, and the world had witnessed their love story's happy ending. But the price of that acceptance was becoming clear. They could be together, but only if they agreed to pretend that the people and relationships that had shaped them were less important than the image the monarchy needed to project. The silence between them that night was different from the comfortable silences they had shared during their decades-long courtship. This was the silence of two people beginning to understand that their marriage would be both more and less than they had hoped, more complicated by institutional demands, and less free than they had imagined. As they prepared for bed, both Charles and Camilla knew that their real married life was just beginning, and it would be lived not just as husband and wife, but as representatives of an institution that would continue to test their ability to balance personal happiness with public duty. The wedding was over, but the silence that had begun that morning would echo through their marriage for years to come. 3 months after the wedding, the phone call stopped coming. Camilla sat in her new office at Clarence's house, reviewing her schedule of royal engagements, when she realized that she hadn't spoken to her cousin Margaret in over a week. It wasn't that they had fought or grown apart. It was something more subtle and more damaging. The distance that had begun on her wedding day had gradually expanded into a gulf that neither of them quite knew how to cross. The transformation had been so gradual that Camilla almost hadn't noticed it happening. First, there were the security considerations that made spontaneous visits difficult. Then came the protocol requirements that meant every social gathering had to be planned weeks in advance and approved by various palace departments. Slowly but surely, the natural rhythms of family life had been replaced by the careful choreography of royal existence. Charles found her there one evening, staring out the window at the London traffic. He had been king for 6 months now, following his mother's abdication, and the weight of the crown sat heavily on both their shoulders. "You're thinking about them again," he said, settling into the chair beside her desk. "I called Margaret today," Camilla said without turning around. "We talked for exactly 12 minutes before she said she had to go. She used to call me 3 times a week just to chat about nonsense. Now our conversations feel like diplomatic meetings." Charles understood the pain in her voice because he felt it too. The palace machinery that had always surrounded him had slowly but inevitably enveloped Camilla as well, changing not just how others saw her, but how they interacted with her. The spontaneity and warmth that had always characterized her relationships were being replaced by the careful formality that royal life demanded. "Tom called yesterday," Camilla continued. "He's getting married next spring, and he wanted to know if there are any special considerations he needs to plan around if we attend his wedding. My own son is asking me if my presence will complicate his wedding day." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Their wedding, which was supposed to represent the triumph of love over institutional barriers, had instead demonstrated just how powerful those barriers were. The palace hadn't prevented their marriage. It had simply absorbed it, making it part of the larger royal narrative while quietly reshaping the relationships that had made Camilla who she was. "I've been thinking about that conversation with your mother," Camilla said, finally, turning to face Charles. "She said that when you marry into this family, you accept responsibility for something larger than yourselves. I thought I understood what that meant. And now I understand that she wasn't talking about responsibility. She was talking about surrender." The words hit Charles harder than he expected. He had spent his entire life learning to balance personal desires with royal duty, but he had never fully considered what that balance would cost the woman he loved. The silence that had followed their wedding wasn't just the absence of her family's voices. It was the absence of the parts of herself that those relationships had sustained. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sir Michael, Charles's private secretary, entered with the next day's schedule and a briefing folder. "Your Majesties, there's been a request for Queen Camilla to attend the opening of a children's hospital in Leeds next month. The organizers have specifically asked if any family members might accompany her to help with the community outreach aspects of the visit." Camilla looked up sharply. "What kind of family members?" "Well, Your Majesty, they mentioned that having relatives who aren't royal but understand the local community might help connect with families in ways that purely official visits sometimes cannot." It was exactly the kind of opportunity that would have excited Camilla before her wedding. Her sister Annabelle would have been perfect for such an event, with her natural warmth and ability to talk to anyone. But now, the logistics seemed overwhelmingly complicated. "I'll need to review the security implications," Sir Michael continued. "And there would be questions of protocol regarding how non-royal family members should be introduced, and what their role would be during the official proceedings." "Of course there would," Camilla said quietly. After Sir Michael left, Charles and Camilla sat in the growing darkness, neither of them bothering to turn on the lights. The silence between them had become a familiar companion, filled with all the things they couldn't quite say about what their marriage had become. "I had lunch with William today," Charles said eventually. He asked me if you were happy. What did you tell him? I told him that happiness might be the wrong word for what any of us feel in this position. I told him that we find satisfaction in service, purpose in duty, and meaning in the work we do. All of which is true, Camilla said. But it's not an answer to his question. They both knew that William's question came from his own experience of trying to balance royal life with authentic relationships. He had watched his parents' marriage collapse under the weight of institutional expectations, and he was determined not to repeat those mistakes in his own life. The silence isn't just about my family, Camilla said suddenly. It's about all the parts of myself that don't fit into the royal narrative. My opinions that might be controversial, my friendships with people who aren't socially prominent, my interests that don't have obvious charitable applications. Charles nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The monarchy required not just public service, but a kind of personal curation that gradually eliminated anything that might complicate the official story. Remember when we used to talk about modernizing the monarchy? Camilla asked, making it more accessible, more human? I remember. I think we were naive. We thought we could change the institution. Instead, it changed us. The conversation was interrupted by the evening news from the television in the corner. The lead story was about the royal family's busy schedule of upcoming engagements, with particular focus on Queen Camilla's growing confidence in her royal role. The reporter spoke of her successful adaptation to royal life and her positive influence on the king. Watching herself on television, smiling and waving at official events, Camilla felt a strange disconnection. The woman on screen looked like her and carried her name, but seemed to exist in a different world from the one where she sat missing conversations with her cousin. The really strange thing, Camilla said as the news moved on to other stories, is that everyone thinks this is a success story. The papers write about how well I've adapted, how seamlessly I've integrated into royal life. Haven't you? That's just it. I'm not sure that's the right question. The question isn't whether I've adapted to royal life. The question is whether the person who has adapted is still me. They sat together until late that night, talking about the cost of crowns and the price of palaces. They spoke about the family members who had gradually stopped calling, the friends who now seemed uncomfortable with the formality that surrounded their relationship, and the parts of themselves that had been quietly edited out of their public personas. But they also spoke about the work they were able to do, the causes they could support, and the platform they had to make positive changes in the world. The conversation was honest in a way that royal life rarely allowed, acknowledging both the losses and the gains that came with their position. When they finally went to bed, both Charles and Camilla understood that their marriage had become something they hadn't expected, a case study in institutional power and personal cost. They loved each other no less than they had on their wedding day, but their love now existed within boundaries that neither of them had fully anticipated. The silence that had begun when Camilla's family was turned away from their wedding had indeed changed the palace forever. But, perhaps more importantly, it had changed them, teaching them that even the greatest love stories must ultimately find their place within the larger narratives that shape royal life. As queen and king, they would find ways to serve with dignity and purpose. But the cost of those crowns would always include the memories of voices that had gradually grown quiet and relationships that had been carefully managed until they barely resembled what they once were. The palace had absorbed their love story, but in doing so, it had also revealed truths about power, loyalty, and the price of belonging that would influence how they approached their reign for years to come.